I was really motivated to write the book Marketing Through Turbulent Times because I saw this great contradiction going on around me. Being new to the country, relatively new to the country, I was watching with interest the election of Obama. And I was watching Obama speak of hope and giving people hope and making people feel empowered and mobilising people to get involved in his election campaign and using social media to get people mobilised. But at the same time, we had a really phenomenal shift in the economy. We had the wheels come off the economy, the financial crisis hit quicker than any of us had seen before. And people were starting to lose their jobs and starting to become concerned about affording homes. And so we had hopelessness at the same time. So on the one hand, we had Obama giving hope, but on the other hand, we had people feeling really hopeless. And I was intrigued, I was riveted by what I could see going on around me, and that really motivated me to get working on this book. And so what I did was intertwined themes of democracy, social media, recession, economic depression, consumer depression, and bundled it all up and said, well, what does this mean for marketing? And that's really what the book's about. It's about being relevant for the context of today, and also looking at how marketing managers can cope and excel and execute great strategies that will allow them to grow for tomorrow. The book's there are many messages. The first message is to be relevant and to understand the world within which we're operating. And we've seen some great examples of companies that have been relevant. For example, Denny's with the breakfast that they offered, JetBlue, Hyundai with different programs and promotions to help those who've become recently unemployed. So on the one hand, it's about being relevant and making sure that companies are relevant to today. The second message in the book is to execute marketing strategy well. And even though that seems obvious, what happens in times like this is that companies and managers become really spooked and they become quite frightened about whether they'll be around tomorrow and what the company will look like. And I think there's a bias toward extreme cost cutting and trying to drive the bottom line down, but forgetting why they're in business and forgetting that customers are the reason that they're in business. So we've seen quite a lot of companies and managers making some what I call knee-jerk reactions that don't necessarily help for the long term. So reminding managers to be quite focused on executing great marketing strategies. So one section of my book goes through and talks about what it means to execute a great marketing strategy. One of the sections in the book that is really fascinating, that's actually probably gathered quite a lot of interest, is that about marketing expenditure through a recession. One of the things I did is that I put some data together about the 1980s recession, and I looked at companies' performance through the recession and what happened after the recession. More specifically, I looked at companies in 1979, just before the 1980s recession started. I measured marketing expenditure through the recession, identified companies that spent ahead of their competitors during the recession and those who didn't. And what was really interesting is I found that companies that spent ahead of the competition ended up performing better 5 years post-recession. And I think that result's really interesting because what happens during a recession is that marketing budgets get cut. And one of the reasons for that is that marketing expenditure is not directly tied to production, and it's seen as a softer item and one that can readily be cut. But my data shows that if you cut marketing expenditure through a recession, in 5 years' time your market value is actually going to be lower than companies that haven't. So that was another really important message and an important finding, and related to that then is the long-term implications of marketing expenditure. So while I talk about focusing on great marketing strategy and executing marketing strategy well, bound within that is a message of short-term versus long-term expenditure. And one of the things that I found through the data analysis I undertook was to be mindful of long-term implications of marketing expenditure. Don't just do stuff for the short term that's going to generate quick gains and quick returns. So that was the second message. The third message of the book was really saying once you've got everything down and you're doing what you should be doing well, by the way, also look for growth opportunities, because being fixated on what you're doing and can create blind spots and may encourage you or discourage you from looking at things that are happening around you. So one of the messages in the book is a big part of the book actually is to look at ways of growing. And I actually put a framework in the book called a problems and solutions framework, and I talk about different ways of identifying opportunities for growth in the marketplace. The companies probably almost come as no surprise. Their names like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, ExxonMobil, big companies that are still around and still really strong today. And I think my understanding of the way these companies operate is that they understand the value of their brands. They understand that brands are a long-term asset that provides value to the company. And so even in times of recession, companies like Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson are very careful and very mindful to keep investing in brands for the long term. The ones that immediately come to mind were actually companies through the Great Depression of the 1930s, Hewlett-Packard, Polaroid, I understand, and even DuPont, which wasn't launched during the Depression, but some of their great inventions came out. I believe nylon was introduced through the Great Depression, and I think there's that wonderful expression that necessity is the mother of invention, and I think when our back's against the wall, we not only focus on process, but we also adjust our mental models and start questioning assumptions we have of the market. So I think times like these are great opportunities for us to find silver lining. Yeah, the ones that I'm using in my book that have had specific promotions that are empathetic with customers, I think that's really important to show that the brand is on your side. A couple of others I put in the book, I believe FedEx allowed people to copy resumes, visas at their stores. I believe Walgreens had a free clinic during daytime, I think between 11 and 3 or something like that, for people who are both unemployed and uninsured. So really, companies who are empathetic and say, look, we're on your side, we're here with you. And I think part of that message right now is if you look back a year, a lot of the problems we face, people are blaming on corporations and big brands, and people aren't trusting big brands. Dare I be bold enough to talk about the financial community, but a lot of people are laying blame on big brands and big corporations for the mess that we're in now. And I think that's placing greater challenges for big brands and big organisations to show that they are actually empathetic and on the side of consumers. My gut feel is that companies have to do quite a lot. And I think what happens, if you take Denny's as an example, it's not just the cost of the promotion. I don't know how many breakfasts they gave away, but the publicity that they gained along the way, the fact that even you and I are talking about it right now, and we talk about it, among students, among marketing managers, that's invaluable. And so the cost of the promotion is one thing, but the buzz it generates is quite another. One of the greatest changes to marketing at the moment is the way we measure our performance. Now, marketing's always been accountable for things like market share and sales and profitability per customer. Those are standard measures that we have, but increasingly we're hearing about demonstrating cash flow and the impact of our marketing decisions on cash flow. And if you look around, companies like Wynn's, hotel chain, pharmaceutical companies, many organisations are hoarding cash. Johnson & Johnson's another one. So companies are stockpiling cash as a precaution just to make sure they are viable in the long term, and therefore marketing managers are having to demonstrate the impact of their decisions on cash flow. And that's quite a new phenomena for marketing managers to have to focus on. The other thing that's changed, it was changing pre-recession, but it's become more prominent now, is the need to demonstrate return on marketing investment. And partly we've been encouraged to do that a lot more as marketers because we can. We're in a more measurement-oriented world, but marketing managers are having to be a lot more accountable for marketing expenditure, and I think that's exacerbated through the recession. I think the need to be accountable is just simply exacerbated.
Well, technology makes it a lot easier now to show return on investment.
It does, and here's the challenge with that though, is that it's easy to demonstrate return on investment if in fact you're tracking sales, which is a short-term marketing spend, if you will. But where it's more difficult is the stuff that I think we've lost sight of is the long-term brand building activities, which I think we've reduced even more through the recession, and that's always been a harder relationship to measure. If I spend $1 just building awareness for my brand and making you feel good about the brand, the sales impact doesn't necessarily flow through immediately, and that relationship's always been a tough one to demonstrate. And I think in times like these, because it's hard for us to demonstrate, it makes it more challenging for marketers to spend money on brand building.
Mm-hmm. It seems like marketers are sort of in the corner right now, because not only do you have to show improved your value, but you're also getting your budgets cut at the same time. Is that a common thread?
Absolutely, budgets are being cut, and again, because marketing spend isn't normally contractually bound, it's not like, I've committed multi-million dollars to a piece of capital equipment, for example, that I can't get out of. With marketing expenditure, it's not normally like that, so it's easier to cut. And again, because people misunderstand the benefits that marketing can bring, it's seen as not necessarily tied to production of goods, therefore we can cut it back. I think one of the other challenges, again, it's not just because of the recession, but at the moment we've got social media that's taken off as well. And I see a lot of conflict in terms of how we put a marketing program together, because on the one hand, we know we should be using social media, but with social media, because it's so new, a lot of marketing managers aren't quite sure how to measure its effectiveness. And I use a quote in my book, I can't remember who it's from, but this person was saying, no one's ever lost their job for recommending primetime television advertising, but people could well lose their job for recommending a social media campaign, because it's just such green territory, it's such unknown. And so I think even within the marketing domain, we've got challenges that are being created by new technology, and we're all learning about it as we go. So I think that's really tough. Some data I saw that even though marketing budgets have been cut dramatically, I believe that social media budgets are up a little bit, but off a very small base, so that they're coming up. It connects with the Drucker philosophy, because we talk about management as a liberal art, and we talk about the human side of management, and that philosophy permeates throughout my book. It connects also because my research is very much at the interface of marketing and entrepreneurship, marketing and innovation, which is a very Drucker space. And so a lot of my growth strategies are partnering marketing and innovation together and looking at how we can partner them. It also connects in a way that I'm really delighted about. I had the opportunity to put together a new class a year ago called Transforming and Creating Markets to Generate Growth. And one of the nice things about the Drucker School is that we have a bit of freedom to experiment with new courses. And many of the ideas I tested out on my not weary, you're going to edit that, I'll say it again. Many of the ideas that I tested out on my students actually ended up being in the book. So it's been a wonderful relationship between teaching and research, that my research informed my teaching, and my teaching has come back to inform my research.